You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Cruikshank. Our podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts, Rachel Land and Katya Barch, as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs. Welcome to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. We are here today to talk about burnout. The first part of our discussion is going to be on what burnout is, what it looks like, what are some of the predisposing factors. We'll get into that pretty quickly, as many people I think can relate to that, but then really focusing the meat of this episode on how to support burnout, some helpful techniques that we've found, some things that we like to do, and hopefully some little tidbits of inspiration that will be helpful for you as a teacher or a student or a healthcare provider along the way. All right. So this was Rachel's baby. She was the one who instigated this podcast. And I was instantly like, yes, we have to do this. So I'm going to hand it over to her and let her kick it off.
I think this was an inspiration for me, firstly, because when it comes to mental health, I don't have personal experience with depression. I don't have personal experience with anxiety, but stress and its entire family, including burnout, are definitely where I have been sitting throughout my life. And you produce such a huge amount of work. You have this sort of endless font, it seems, of creativity. You're always putting out fresh new content, and you never seem to get tired or bored or run out of ideas or need a break. So I thought you'd be the perfect person to hit up for some really good conversation around what burnout is, what it looks like, and how we can get through it, get past it, avoid it. So perhaps we start by talking about what burnout is and what it can look like, because I think there's a perception out there that burnout is this dramatic, I've hit the brick wall, gone down in flames. And sometimes that does happen. I've had that experience, but I think sometimes it can be a bit sneakier than that. So I'll start by asking you, how would you define burnout, or what do you think it looks like?
Well, I think first of all, like most things in the world, there's a big spectrum. And I think for a lot of people, it begins, for me, a lot of those kind of initial underpinnings of burnout are this kind of negativity about how I see my work, about how I see the world. And newsflash, by the way, I've definitely experienced burnout in many different amounts. I know when I graduated from Chinese medicine school was probably the most significant I've experienced it. I had some pretty significant burnout at that point, and that I worked my way through, and have had it in other contexts definitely since. And I think it's always something, we're juggling. We like to have these diagnostic features of like, is it or isn't it? But I think this idea of burnout is something we can probably all connect to, that lack of enthusiasm. Obviously, feeling tired and depleted and exhausted is a really key feature of it. But also, I think irritability, impatience, I notice myself, lack of focus, really sometimes just trouble getting going. I know for some people, and myself included, sometimes that means reaching for wine more often or sugar more often as a way to cope. But for me, a lot of it revolves around this change in perspective that's happened for me, usually from working too much.
Mm. You kind of lose the excitement and the gratitude and lean more towards sort of cynicism and, oh.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah, I've had the big flame out as well. My first experience of working was in corporate marketing, and at the time it was really exciting. They all felt like they were changing the world. I had a team of staff that I was managing, and as somebody who was 21, that was a big deal. So I was often there at 7 a.m. I was often there at 11 p.m. And then I got sick. I got a kind of cold flu sort of thing. And it wasn't super serious, but it was like a switch had flicked. And I realized firstly that I was completely and utterly exhausted, that I hadn't, read a book for enjoyment in 6 years. and that while I was sick, the people from work were only really interested in getting the work out of me, and they weren't there to kind of take care of me or look after me. So I think that was a really helpful experience to have in my early 20s to put work in perspective. And I
Mhm.
think in that place, I had the big sort of flame out. I quit my job and then I spent 6 months fun employed, and then wound up traveling. And that was the beginning of my whole new life. So it turned out to be a very positive thing, but it was a real catalyst for realizing that I was pouring my heart and soul into something that I didn't believe had any benefit. I didn't think
Mm.
that corporate marketing was helping anyone. I didn't think I was making anyone's life better. And there was this constant friction between my values, what I believed to be important, and my behavior, where I was pouring, all of my passion and thought and care and time and energy. And I think it was a really helpful experience to have early on in life to really clarify, not that. That's not what I want. What do I want? I don't know. I spent the next few years traveling as a ski bum to figure that out. Uh, but I haven't had that same really big flame out since. And I think I'm realizing that I missed a lot of the early signals that you're talking about now of getting a
Mm.
bit cynical,
Yeah.
feeling tired, feeling uninspired, turning to other things for interest, whether that was compulsive exercise. I started rollerblading, which has dated me very much, but rollerblading was like my alcohol because I didn't really drink then. That I would finish work at 11, put on my rollerblades, and then skate through the city streets at night. And
I love
I know
that.
it sounds crazy, but it sort of opened my eyes to the fact that there was a whole other world outside of
It
what
was
I'd
your
done at
outlet.
school and university. Exactly. It was my
Yeah.
outlet. And the only thing I'd add to the list of signs and symptoms you said was I'll often get physical symptoms too. I know if I start to niggle in my body, something starts to
Mm.
hurt or get sore, or I'm not healing the way I should. That's a sign that I'm run down and I'm just
Mhm.
not paying attention. Mm,
Or like I find those body aches and pains that don't really have a known origin, which,
yeah.
obviously can be other things. Sometimes it's just that we've been sitting at our desk too long or other things like that.
Uh-huh.
There's so many different things that come into play. But I agree. I think physical symptoms, especially the ones that you can't really explain or that, oh, like
Hmm.
I love the ones that come on like really suddenly and it's like, oh, my back is out, but it was just because you were bending over or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not necessarily that's entirely burnout. Obviously there's a lot more to the equation, but when I think of burnout, I think of this stress processing system kind of failing, right? The
Mm,
things that normally wouldn't have been a problem before all of a sudden become like the cherry on top, right? The
mm.
straw that broke the camel's back. And so whether that means physical symptoms or that like irritability, I know sometimes I'll be that way with my husband and I'll be like, what is wrong with me? Like sometimes I
Yeah.
won't say it out loud, but you're if you say it to me, don't you
That's
dare.
definitely the secret to a long and happy relationship is just don't always say what you're thinking out loud.
But yeah, I notice it, I that
Yeah.
for me is an interesting one is that kind of the like that irritability that comes sometimes because I don't have that ability to manage. I'm at like overload.
Maximum. Yeah.
Yeah, and
You've
then, like,
lost
I just can't
perspective.
process another thing. So
Mhm.
for me, that's a really big one, the physical stuff. Absolutely, but I think that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Mm. I think it's important for people to realize that those little signs and symptoms can be so huge. I just read an article by organizational psychologist Adam Grant about languishing, which is this sort of forgotten concept in mental health of you're not miserable, you're not flat out on your bed, but you're just meh, nothing's really piquing your
Mm,
interest or getting you passionate or getting you excited. You can't be bothered. And I think from the cumulative load of the pandemic, there are a lot of people who are kind of languishing at the moment,
yes.
just
Yes.
getting through day after day.
I call that the loss of your mojo.
Mm,
And I actually had a
totally.
little wave of this recently, like a month ago, and I'm like, "Oh gosh," I look over at my husband, I'm like, "I know what's coming." Like, "When when does the mojo come back?" And then, like, for me, and we're gonna talk about this later, but for me,
Mm,
like, I really have to push back and dump some things back in. To me, it's this energy management of like, "Okay, Tiffany, you've been just putting out And
Yeah.
even if we're yoga teacher, like it's not like I wasn't doing any practices. I was still practicing, regularly. But it's like, okay, now you've done a lot. We've all done a lot in COVID, and so it's time to put some more back in. I agree. I
Mhm.
think that the Mojo Factor is a big one because that's a hard one, and um, it's a hard one to quantify. It's a hard one to put your finger on. I know I
Yeah,
started
but you
going
know it
back to
when you feel it.
and I went back to see my acupuncturist, and even as an acupuncturist myself, it's like it's kind of hard to describe. But
In my household, it's like I just can't be asked. That's the I just can't be
mm,
asked anymore. Can't be bothered. Ugh.
that's
So
the
we have a
overload.
sort of
Yeah.
yeah, and I love the fact that you immediately go to the equation because that's what comes up in research. When I look at burnout research, is this mismatch between what you're outputting versus the things that fill you back up again and build your reserves. I definitely have a phase in burnout where I'm not maybe coherent or sensible enough to go there, and I just need to kind of break. I'm going to do the bare minimum. What do I have to get done today to meet my commitments?
Mhm.
And for the rest of the time, I'm going to skive off. I'm going to go to the lake. I'm going to go to the mountains. Or, maybe the weather's terrible. I'm going to watch some TV, some bad TV that isn't enriching me in any way. Maybe it's eating something, but just to kind of do the things that allow me to just relish in life. I can't do anything sensible or constructive. I just need a break and want nothing to be required of me. So
I
often I'll do
agree.
that if I'm still working, just tick the boxes that have to be ticked today, but not head into all the extras that I would normally do to kind of get ahead.
Yeah. You and I are both like that.
Yeah. Well, I've got time, so I might as well get started.
Get ahead, get ahead, and then you're like, "There's
Totally.
always more to get ahead, get
There's
ahead."
never an ahead.
You have
This
to
is
do
what my partner always says. He's like, "You will always find something to do." And I'm like, "Yeah, but this time I'm not finding something. It's on my list already. It's not an extra. This is on the list."
I know, I have that in my DNA. I know my mom's retired now, nothing really specifically that she has to do, and yet
Uh-huh.
every day is busy, but not just busy like, like some people are retired and they're like, "Oh, I'm always with my friends, and then I'm doing this." It's like, no,
Mhm.
she's got all these really stressful, busy things to do, and you're like, "But bro, you're
You're retired.
retired." Like
You're supposed to be living the dream right now, right?
so we hope we learned from our parents.
Yeah. So I guess when it comes to strategies to working with burnout or working through burnout, to me the first one would be recognition and awareness, just knowing that you're in a state that isn't sustainable. And you can't always take a break straight away. Sometimes there are projects or deadlines that you have to get through, or you work somewhere that has a semester, or you don't have any annual leave coming up. But
Mm.
just recognizing that you've surpassed your capacity and something needs to change pretty quickly. For me, that would be the first step.
And
What
it's
about
like
for
the first
you?
step of burnout, just like, like recovery in
Mm,
addiction programs too. And, I think, I think that's a big part of it. That first step of just noticing it does
mm,
kind of change things because whether you're aware of it or not, at least for me, I'm starting to become a little bit more aware of my energy as a currency, as the
mm.
intake and output and input. And, though, like you said, there are times when we can't really slow down much, where we do need to kind of keep things going. We all have this ebb and flow in our lives, and it may not be that perfect time for you to slow down.
Yeah.
But I think even just having that awareness of where you're
Hmm.
at gives yourself also a little bit of, it's almost like kindness to yourself or
Yeah, you cut
forgiveness.
yourself a little bit of slack. Like I know I'm a bit run down. I'm at my limit, so I'm just going to be aware of that for the next however long it is that needs to be to finish the project or finish the semester or get through whatever you need to get through. But just
Yeah.
knowing it shifts your perception of what you're expecting of yourself. Like, of course, I'm a bit irritable. Of course, I'm a bit tired. It's okay. This is not forever.
And I think it's interesting too. Like I know, this time recently, I think it was a month or so ago, that I was referring to before. Like, I had a talk, we were on a team call, and I was just like, hey, total transparency. This is where I'm at. And they were like, great, okay, da 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 da. I'm gonna run with this. I'm gonna run with this. And we figured out we're gonna cancel this and say no to this, and I think when you have that transparent conversation with the appropriate people, whether that be close people, or maybe it's a social media post. Sometimes people that can be helpful just to profess it to the
Mm,
world sometimes. But
yeah.
it also then people start supporting you in some way, which might just mean not coming to you all the time for certain
Mm,
things. Or I know that's also instigating a lot of growth in our business too, of people, stepping up and finding their own footing, which is really wonderful.
that's fantastic. That's a solution that I would not have thought of, I guess, because mostly I work by myself. But it
Mm.
wouldn't have occurred to me that step two might be tell people and
Mm.
look for a little bit of compassion and grace from them as well. Maybe there are things that they've gotten you to do that they don't need you to do straight away.
And delegate when and
Mm,
if you can. I mean, like, there's a lot of different ways to delegate. That might be like having your parents watch your kids for an evening, or that might be hiring someone to, do something for you for your business.
mm,
But obviously there it depends on, what you're able to do there. But I'm always trying to delegate as much as I can, especially when I hit that point.
mm. That's smart. What can I take off my plate that doesn't have to be me specifically? Or even just what can I let go? I had a friend who
Yeah.
used to wash her sheets and towels every single day. So for me, that would be the very first and very easiest
First
thing to
thing
let go of.
done, gone.
Today, we have dirty sheets and dirty towels, and it's fine because nobody cared but me.
Your body needs some exposure to germs and things. I really believe that.
Totally.
We don't
At
have
least
enough
a
dirt in
day's
our
worth.
lives. I like it. Everything needs to be tidy in my house, but
Mhm.
yeah, doesn't
Cleanliness
necessarily.
is optional.
I'm not. Although after taking microbiology, it's hard not to be a germaphobe. But I'm very aware that they're there. But I love that in microbiology, my teacher ended with, "They're always there. There's nothing you can do about it. Just don't use anti bacterial disinfectants, because then you breed for
Ah,
bacteria resistance." And anyways, so tidy for me is really important, but I agree
yeah.
with you. And I think just cutting those things off of your list that you don't have to do, or delegating them, or saying no.
Mm,
I think delegating is really interesting too, because then we start to realize how powerful the people are around us. Like, we don't have
mhm,
to be the one stop shop. And even if you are a small business or a self run business, there's always ways to get other people involved. And even if you don't have the money to pay them, maybe some kind of trade. I know I did a lot of that at the beginning for a long
mm,
time, finding people who liked what I did and finding ways to trade, and knowing that there's only so much you can do.
yeah.
And there's always people who can do those specific things maybe even better than you.
And sometimes that brings up hidden rules that you didn't even know you had, like my friend washing her sheets and towels every day. Or, for me, it's really important to have a home cooked meal. I'm not a great cook, but I like to know what's in it. But sometimes thinking, it doesn't have to be every single day. My partner doesn't care if he has crackers and cheese. And I don't actually mind having an apple and crackers and cheese either. So it finding those kind of hidden rules and going, do you know what? That doesn't have to be a rule today. Today, it's okay to have eggs on toast.
Yeah. And I think that part's really individual.
Totally.
And I think what we're kind of alluding to is this kind of catchphrase in the yoga world, holistic health realm, social media, this idea of self-care and how important it
Hmm.
is. And I love that the importance, like, people are really talking about this. The problem is, a lot of time when we talk about it, it's like it's that cliche list: take a bath, do
Do a
some mindful
facial.
breathing, go get some sleep, drink lots of water.
Mm,
It's those things that you're looking at and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's great." But somehow it doesn't really translate into real action for most
yeah.
people, because it
Yeah.
lands so cliche, I think, on a lot of people. Though I do think, all of those things are probably really helpful. Like you said, finding ways to take time out, which maybe is a bath, maybe is having a really simple meal that evening.
Mm.
Maybe it's cooking for yourself. I think, in
But you
Chinese
hit the nail
medicine,
on the
that's
head.
important.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head about it being really individual. Like, what are the things that feel,
Mm.
you know, replenishing for you? What are the things that feel like they're filling you back up again? And a bath wouldn't do it for me, but a hike does totally. I'm outside, I've got perspective, whatever the weather is, I'm part of it. And yeah, you were talking about TCM and cooking your own meals.
Well, I think just cooking is a really important form of nourishment, but it's not for everyone. Not everyone enjoys it. And I think the
Mm.
key here is finding things that you enjoy that feel nourishing to you. The subjective is really the most important when we're talking about this
Mm.
self-care rituals. So it really could be anything, like you said, hiking. I sometimes like a bath. When we when we bought our house together, Forrest and I, my like one thing I wanted was I wanted a sauna. So we that's like one of my favorite things to do at the end of the day is like I just feel
Mm.
like it's like something about letting it all go.
We
But
have a
there's
hot tub for exactly the same reason.
yeah.
Just sit in the hot tub, look at the sky,
Oh, well,
exhale the
I need a
day.
sauna with a sunroof now.
Totally. No, you definitely do. The stars are amazing.
Oh, yes, that sounds perfect.
But all those
So,
little things might not be enough. I guess that's the thing that I want to highlight is if I have to get to the end
yeah,
of a project, that might be enough to get me there. But at some point, I need a bigger break, a bigger reset. There's obviously been some mismatch between my energy and my commitments. And
totally.
yeah, that needs to be addressed at some point.
And I do think one of those key things is what we said is like for me, just being aware of your energy as a currency. And like,
Hmm.
where are you spending your currency? And are there places like if your currency was money, like would you be spending it on that? Because sometimes when we just consider it and are aware of that, not that you have to be weighing out everything you do during your day, but when I'm aware of that, a lot of times it changes where I spend that energy currency. For
Yeah,
me,
it's
a
like the
lot of
difference
times,
between using credit and cash when you really
yeah,
feel the cash being handed over. And if only we could do that with our time and attention.
yeah. And like when I'm working with patients, a lot of times just describing that is enough. I mean, a lot of times I'll start with that when I'm working with someone who has burnout and just planting that seed and watching how they respond to that. I think the key with burnout is not adding in too much. Although I
Mm.
think there is a time where maybe if you have some space in your life, like you did when you quit and kind of traveled the world, where having a really clear plan and really feeding yourself up, especially when you are really more significantly burnt out.
Mm.
Um, I think that can be really helpful. But like you said, I think just finding ways to do that within whatever realm that is in a way that's enjoyable is really key.
And for me, it
Sleep.
takes a little while to get enough energy back to figure out a plan. When I'm in it,
Yes.
it's usually just tomorrow, just tomorrow, just tomorrow, just tomorrow. Mm.
Exactly. That's a huge catch 22. And the
Mm.
other cliche I think is sleep, right?
Mm.
The sleep one, that's always on the list. And I talked about this with you before. It's like as much as I would love to talk about sleep, it's like a whole nother issue. And hopefully we'll do a few probably a few episodes on it, but at least one at some point. Because it's another one whether you like the bath, improve your sleep. And for people who aren't sleeping well, which often goes along with burnout, the more you focus on the fact that you're not sleeping well, sometimes the harder it is to sleep well.
Yeah, that's my big objection to Matthew Walker's work, actually, is because he highlights so clearly what all the negative effects of poor sleep are, that it's a massive stress for people who aren't sleeping well. They're like, oh my God, I'm destroying my mental capacity. I'm probably going to give myself cancer. And that's the last thing you want to be thinking
Yes.
about at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're awake.
I know. And for me, that's the Why We Sleep guy, right? Is that his
Hmm.
book? Yeah. And
Yes.
for me, like that's been my superpower
Yeah.
for a long time. And of course I've had, moments of struggling with it a little bit briefly, but it's kind of my superpower. And so when I read that book, I was just like, wow, I feel so powerful now. And my husband was like, this is awful because that's
Yeah,
his Achilles
hashtag
heel.
smug and superior. I mean, I'm a pretty good sleeper too, but the people that I've spoken to who have fully fledged
Oh,
insomnia, it's such a massive source of stress for them.
yeah.
And the stress has become a whole separate thing. So I think you're right. I think we need to talk about sleep as a whole big basket of issues down the track.
Okay, so I'm sorry, we're not going to talk about sleep, but it is important. More to come
Yeah.
later. I always love the TCM side of this too. And,
Mm.
there's a lot more to it, but just in a general sense, from a TCM lens, yin and yang, this balance of yin and yang is kind of the root of health and wellness. And, if you're familiar with that yin yang symbol, the idea is that that's not a static symbol, but it's fluid of one turning into the other. So, they're really dependent on each other. They control each other. They feed each other. So there's this beautiful symbiotic relationship. So, what's I think really interesting there, and there's a lot more we could talk about on that, but I think what's interesting from that perspective is that for most people, they not only need the restorative practices that and yin and meditation, which I think of as giving back to the system, the rest, the introspection, giving our body some time to now focus its energy inward on repairing and digesting and processing and healing versus outward on the world around us.
Mm.
But they also need, I think it's also important to have some movement practices for those who are more yang deficient. That movement stokes the fire. If you're familiar with
Mm.
yang, for those who are more yin deficient, they tend to be more restless. And so the movement just helps them settle. And so, in a very simplistic way, it's kind of finding that balance of gentle movement without really like exhausting myself, without exerting a lot of energy to create circulation and that spark in the body through exercise that you enjoy or movement you enjoy, as well as what we tend to focus on in yoga are these nourishing practices, which, if you practice yoga, definitely if you teach yoga, you're very familiar with maybe this idea of these introspective practices like yin and restorative and meditation as being more nourishment in the stillness, in the silence, in the introspection.
I'm so glad that you highlighted that because I do often get the feeling in the yoga world that movement practices are seen as sort of inferior. They're just the stepping stone to get you to stillness and
Mm,
introspection. And I think they're equally important, really just depending on what's going on in the rest of your life. And I'm so
yeah.
glad that you put them on equal footing.
Yeah, and I think different people will find a different balance of the two. And from a Western perspective, we know that exercise builds more mitochondria, which is what creates that energy, that currency too. So, which makes sense in that yin yang theory too, that they both feed each other. So
Mm.
we need both of them to support each other. So if you're really depleted, it's not just about doing one of them. Though I think when people are really burnt out, our tendency is to already be going and doing and exercising and all of this stuff. And so, from a yoga perspective, what we tend to focus on is creating that balance through the introspection and stillness and
Mm.
those restorative practices. Because, I think what's really interesting is that they're hard to prioritize. When you're burnt out and your to do list is overflowing, like it's always the first thing to get cut for
Yeah,
most
it's like we
people.
need to hit rock bottom before we make that a priority. It's such
Yes.
a sad human trait, isn't it?
It's true though. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I like the rock bottom image. It's true for a lot of
Totally. It's like
people.
you've got to be chronic fatigue, or I have a client who's had Lyme disease and been in bed effectively for 10 years, and it's like you have to get to that point before you're willing to factor
Totally.
those quieter and gentler practices into your life. Whereas I think most of us have been pretty well conditioned to know that we need some physical exercise, and we should be getting out for our walk
We
or
need the
whatever the thing
things.
is.
We need
That
the
that that
rest. Yeah.
second stream hasn't really made its way into, I
Yeah.
guess, cultural programming yet. You've got to be quiet. You've got to be still sometimes.
I actually wrote an article. It was before I started teaching online. It was the reason why the platform that hired me was this article called "The Value of Nothing."
Mm.
And it's this idea in Chinese medicine that this downtime we tend to think of it as just like resting or extra credit time, but that there is a preciousness to it, to building and maintaining our reserves of energy and vitality and resilience. And to me, there's a difference, though I think sometimes just lying on the couch and watching TV can be really nice. I'm not against that. But I consider that more of a passive kind of
Mm.
relaxation versus an active form of replenishing is in these yin introspective. It's almost like we just magnify it. So like, yeah, I mean, it's not this cut and dry, but like maybe an hour laying on the couch and relaxing is probably equivalent to maybe like 10 minutes, of that. It's just more potent,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes you just need to zone out and watch TV or read a book, and that's fine. But I think these practices can kind of amplify that in the stillness and the silence. And there's really a lot of value to that, which is hard to prioritize from a Western perspective.
Mm. I think going back to the burnout conversation too, we were sort of talking about making a plan and figuring out steps
Mm,
forward. And something that I've really noticed from the sections of my life, section one, working in corporate marketing, and section two, being a traveling ski bum, and then section three, being a yoga teacher, is for me, my tolerance to burnout is much higher when I'm doing something that I care about and believe in. And that's almost a double edged sword, isn't it? Because the plus side is I've got extra fuel in the tank to get me up and get me out, because I really do believe that I'm helping people and
mm.
doing something meaningful and worthwhile. But it also means that sometimes I keep doing things when I probably should.
Slow down.
Yeah, or take a break or take
Relax.
a weekend or chill.
I know that's like the joke in my family. Like when we go away on vacation, it's unfortunate because then I always make all these plans. I get all these ideas of things I want to do in the business. And when I'm just there and creative, it just kind of comes. But for me, I think too that when I get to this place, and I think you started the conversation talking about how much I do, and I think we all do a lot. But for me, I would say the thing on my list that really replenishes me the most is recharging through learning. And it doesn't necessarily need to be through an organized curriculum or course. That can be like on my birthday this weekend. I was so excited to like sit down and thumb through some journals that I was behind on. And to me, that was really enjoyable. If it's not enjoyable to you, don't do it. It's not helpful for burnout if you don't enjoy it. But I think as a yoga teacher or in other professions too, stimulating that positivity through curiosity. That curiosity for me is what's really interesting. So, when I'm feeling really burnout, overwhelmed, I really have to push away. And, like you said early on, create space, take the pressure off so that I can just be creative. And sometimes maybe that's taking other people's classes. Maybe that's doing a course or reading research or experimenting in your own home practice. But letting it be, for me, letting it stem from curiosity and this kind of source of nourishment. And so I think learning is for me is a big part of that. For me.
100%. For me too, but especially as I'm heading back up the other side, I've sort of created some space. I've had a bit of a break. The tank's not empty anymore. And at that point, it's so important to introduce some new thoughts or new perspectives or new ideas, or even to dive back into something that I was interested in before, to refill the deeper creativity reserves and the motivation reserves. And
Mm.
I think for me it can't happen straight away, but when I get to that point, I always know that I'm heading back into happier territory again. Like I've got the energy
Mm.
to learn, all the ideas are coming again. Yeah, it's all good.
Interesting. I love that because for me, I mean, I would say I often do that right away. Um,
Impressive.
but here's the key for me, it can't be a chore. Because
Yeah.
sometimes I go into that phase where I'll like sign up for 4 online courses and like put them in my schedule. And then I'm like stressed out because I don't have any time left in my week. And I went back and repeated some grad school courses that I had enjoyed in grad school this summer, and I really loved it. But toward the end of the summer, it was just like hogging up big spaces on my calendar. and
Mm,
so, I think you have to find something that works for you. But what is interesting about it is it speaks to the crux of it that we started talking about, which really is the mindset that goes
mm,
along with burnout for me. It really is a mindset for me. Obviously, there's a refilling of the tanks. Um, but being able to find that positivity again, for me, curiosity is such a great way to do that. That's what works for me. It's not for everyone. I know a lot of our teachers are very curious too. So I'm sure a lot of our yoga medicine teachers find that too. But there's this negativity, this critic that comes out when we're really burnt out, and everything's too much, everything's overwhelming, everything's negative. We can't really find those positive things. So being able to step back, have that curiosity, relish in that somehow. And for me, the gratitude practices are another really interesting one. If you're not, interested in the the learning or the other parts that I've mentioned, Um, any simple, I mean, there's so many gratitude practices out there. I know I just recorded one for yoga medicine online. So maybe if you're listening to this, it's already up there. I think we have some others on there, but there's so many great gratitude practices. Um, do you have any favorites, Rachel?
If I
Gratitude?
ever do have trouble falling asleep, and that doesn't happen very often because it's my superpower as well, but if I ever do have trouble going to sleep, that'll be what I'll think about, kind of list all of the things that I'm grateful for. And I usually don't get through very many. I'll start with the really obvious ones like, I've got a warm, safe house to live in. I've got a great partner that is my best friend. And by the time I get down to the details, I'm asleep. So that's usually my favorite
Mm.
way to get to sleep if I'm having trouble. Better than counting
Aw.
sheep, I think.
I love that, and it's interesting because in Chinese medicine, the heart is what is, like, the container for the spirit, so when you go to sleep, the spirit has to be able to settle into the heart, so that's really
Hmm.
interesting, I love that. You're just doing it
Oh,
naturally.
I'm so wise.
But, there's so many great ones, and I think there's a lot of these on the internet. My favorite is, and I usually have this as a repeating event. I do have it as a repeating event in my calendar once a month, and when I'm feeling more burnt out, that might be once a week or even once a day if it's really bad. But it's the one I use is just 3 short questions because it's really quick. I see it as a reminder on my phone. I take just a few minutes to consider these things. Um, one is something challenging that you did or accomplished, which reminds you of the again the positive, like the things that you're doing or creating. Something nice that someone did or said to you or did for you, and then something nice that you said or I think it's more something nice that you did for someone else. And so and sometimes a bunch of things come up. Sometimes you're like really grasping for that one thing and then just finding them. We know that our brain really orients more to the threats in our life as a
Yeah.
protection. And so
I love that it starts there because that would usually be the easiest one to think of when you're in mid burnout, wouldn't it?
mhm, we just have to find the positive things. And I know for me that's a big one. When I get burnout, I do tend to get more negative about things and I have to
Mm.
it becomes more of an exercise, like strength work, it's like you got to do
Work
it,
out your gratitude muscle. I love that.
pump your brain. And it changes everything. I mean, obviously you have to do it, somewhat regularly. It's not like a quick fix or a cure all. And for everyone, different people, different things work, of course. But for me, that's a big one is changing the context,
Mm.
changing the mindset as kind of
We've
the
even started
underpinnings.
in my relationship with my partner. We used to say, "How was your day?" And now the question is, "What's the best thing that happened to you today?"
Oh,
So it's nice. It makes
yeah.
such a fundamental shift in the kinds of things that you talk about. It really does. Usually it'll be like coming home to you. Okay, great. But what else? So that we actually, get into the details of the day. It really does make a profound shift.
It totally does, and Forrest and I go through some of that too. We go through waves of that, but a lot of times we used to when we were walking the dog, we would go over we kind of flip it back and forth sometimes 3 things that you're looking it's always 3 for some reason. 3 things you're
Mm.
looking forward to this day, today, or 3 things that were good about the previous day. Like
Mm.
if it's in the evening, like what are 3 positive things that happened today? I
Always a
like
high
that.
achiever. Taking my idea and making it way better.
Well, it's the same. It's just, I mean, you're marking
3
it with
times
when
better.
you finish your day. I'm
Mm.
marking it with like when we walk the dog and we're just, catching up at the beginning or end of the day. Um,
I like that because I can imagine it really shifting your perspective of the day ahead. Like, oh, I've got the da 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 to look forward to.
yeah, I think we find sometimes retrospect or prospective is better, but either one I think really works. But the interesting thing is how you thread it into your day. Like for you, there's those moments that remind you at the end of the day when you come home or
Mm.
when we walk our dog. I think those are the important tie-ins. So or the reminder in your phone
Mm.
so that there's those connections to your day that don't feel quite as like another. I mean, this one feels like something you're adding to your to-do list a little bit, but like the one that you had and I had with Forrest, it doesn't feel like a to-do list anymore.
Yeah. It's woven in.
Yeah. And for
Yeah,
me,
I think that's
changing
key.
that mindset is the underpinnings of changing how I ration my energy. Because
Mhm.
as I now change my mindset, now I'm starting to maybe choose different things through my day. So I think it can go
Yes.
both ways because I know you said you find it the other way, like you've got to nourish yourself and then start being proactive about the plan.
Yeah, for me usually. But I love that you just said it makes you more proactive about where you do spend your energy, because I think if you're repeatedly getting into a cycle of burnout, it's really worth examining your life, kind of take a step back and look at it with a
Mm.
little more perspective and go, is there some mismatch here, either between what I'm giving out and what I'm taking in, or a mismatch between what I'm doing and what I believe to be worthwhile or important? It kind of, I think it's really important, if it's a repeated thing, to take a step back and look at whether there is some kind of asymmetry there that's creating the pattern. And you might not have thought of that if you hadn't hit burnout phase.
Well, and that's definitely the hot topic with job burnout, right? That
Mm,
conflict between your values and the values of the company that you work with, which is a really interesting thing. Or this idea of like, I know the big one in the yoga world is like, the grass is always greener thing of like, I'm going to quit and become a yoga teacher,
hmm.
which, there's pros and cons to all of those. I'm sure we'll speak on some of those at some point, but, you still have to like figure it out, get there, do the things, run it all yourself.
Mm.
So, it's trying to
You're
find a
not
balance that works
immune.
for you. Maybe that's I get my values and stuff and fulfillment here and I get my financial security here.
Yeah, totally. I do think these days there's this feeling that we should all, our job should all be our vocation. It should be our dharma. But I really don't think that's necessary. I think for some people, yes. And for other people, you can have a job that you do, that you might get some satisfaction from the skills that you exhibit or the people that you're around, but that doesn't have to be your passion. Maybe it's your sports group or your church group or your family, or the shelter that you volunteer at, or whatever your thing is. That could be what sort of lights you up and gives you purpose. It doesn't have to be your day job.
And this is the thing is I think it really is subjective. It really is
Hmm.
about what is meaningful for you. So, we talk to people a lot in our 200 hour about this. I know a lot of people jump in and they're like, I'm going to leave my stressful job and become a yoga teacher and everything's going to be perfect. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, like don't be in a hurry. And for some people that works and that's great. But for some people, having that financial security of a job, they can, clock in and clock out and do the thing that
Mm,
they know, and then also have this thing that they love and maybe finding a way for them to exist together without burning out, without,
yeah.
having several jobs going all at once. And that's where each person has to find what works for them. And again, I really think it is subjective. And if that feels meaningful and helpful to you to have the security and the passion, the thing that you love, then great. If you want to go and just do the thing you love and pour yourself into that, then great. Everyone has a different mixture. And
Mm.
we each have to find that, I think, ourselves.
I think you've really hit the nail on the head here, that the experience of burnout is subjective. What gets you there is subjective. What gets you out of it is subjective. And so, like most things in life, it just requires us to get to know ourselves a little better.
Mm, totally. And sometimes it's like we said at the beginning is I find a big one is cutting yourself some slack. So
Hmm.
that's, might be giving some work to someone else to do. That might be hire a babysitter or social support is such a big thing. Cutting yourself some slack for me means a lot of things. That means being able to manage your workload and delegate. It also means, maybe having help from other people. It takes a tribe. It also means, I think, our social supports, because another thing that we tend to lose that's so important, we could have a whole episode on this. We talk a lot about this in our mental health training, but is the real precious value of those social connections that we have, whatever that might be, family, friends, whatever your support system is, as well as maybe even a counselor, right? So cutting yourself some slack in some form, whether that means reaching out to your support systems or finding ways to delegate or just mentally cutting yourself some slack, like we started with step one,
Mm.
admit you have a problem. It's okay. We all go there sometimes. I think we've all experienced some remnants of this at some point in our lives, unless you're like 12 years old, maybe, and listening to this.
I don't know, school's pretty stressful these days, so
I
probably not
know.
even immune at 12.
That's why I picked, well, I think 12. Come on. 12? Come on. I think that's a fair one.
I was
I don't
pretty
know.
stressed at 12. You know, you gotta get straight A's, it's a lot of pressure.
Okay. Well, it's 7.
Okay, I'm
Anyways,
with you here.
we experience it in some way, I mean, throughout our lives. So, it's an interesting thing to look at, I think, for everyone and to
Mm,
be able to manage somehow. And so, we've mentioned a lot of different things that could be helpful. And what I recommend is really trying to focus in on the things that feel most interesting to you, most enjoyable to you, most helpful. So that might be the things that you're really doing none of already that you haven't tried. Maybe you've tried a lot of these things, or maybe these are like the things, oh, yeah, that's right. I do really enjoy that thing. I just need to make it a habit because
mm,
we know that with burnout and a lot of times adrenal fatigue that goes along with it, we know that with depletion, when the body's really depleted, uh, what's so important is those small things we can do regularly. It's the long-term support. It's not like that exercise routine you do and feel better. That's probably not
or
burnout.
the holiday, you know, I'll have a holiday at the end of the year, and that will make everything fine.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I've had that too. We've gone on holiday and I felt worse. Like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I slowed down. And I've seen this with a lot of my patients too. Like they slow down and they all of a sudden realize how bad they feel. Like it catches up with them, or they start sleeping and realize like they need more. And like, oh yeah, you told your body that you wanted to feel better. So now sleep more.
So nothing against holidays, but you know, don't be hanging your hat on just getting to that holiday and then you'll be fixed and then you'll get back to work again. That there has to be some daily top ups and weekly top ups, and don't wait till the annual holiday.
Yeah. Well, and in Chinese medicine, there's this idea, maybe this helps bring it all full circle. There's this idea of your essence. And the essence in Chinese medicine is something you're born with, a certain amount of it. So this is kind of a little bit of our genetic predisposition. But when you run out of it, you're done. That's it. And so you can either ration how you how you use that energy, or there's other ways of supporting it through good foods you eat, good digestion. There's ways of supporting that as well. But again, this idea that we have a finite amount of resources, and so this preciousness of plugging back in.
Mm,
So I agree with you, and I think as we kind of conclude this and bring it all together, this idea of having a plan is really important. And some of the things I think are important in that plan are keeping it really simple and really attainable, especially at the beginning, especially if your life is still going on. If you're able to get away and have a thing, like great, make it decadent. Maybe it's all the things. That's wonderful. But if you don't have the opportunity to really push far back, like I always talk about pushing back, and that might just be pushing back away from your work a little bit, carving out little times. But if you're still deep in the busyness of your life, I think it's really important to keep that simple, realistic, attainable. And then if you start to realize it's helping and want to do more, great. So I always recommend with my patients and students, like just start with like 10 minutes a day, right? And find the one that you like. So that could be meditation, that could be yin, that could be restorative, yoga nidra, whatever it is, or MFR can also be really relaxing, the myofascial release. But find that thing that you can do, and do it every day. Maybe it's at the end of the day. Find a time you can commit to. Maybe it's even while you're watching TV. Obviously, some of these things are nice to do without the input of that. Um, but it is just important to get it in there at first and make a routine of it, because it's really the long term effects of those practices that are going to really create that support. Um, and so, or maybe it's the gratitude things, the gratitude check ins daily. Maybe it's a couple of those things. I know for me, my morning meditation is a big one because it kind of sets, again, that pace for the day. How am I rationing my energy? It gives me some focus. What are your favorites?
I love the idea of starting really simple and just picking one thing. And for some people, it could be, getting to bed at a certain time or the gratitude practice.
Mm,
For me, I don't know. When I'm in burnout, I don't know that I'm in planning phase. I think I really do need that shift of today I'm doing the bare minimum, tomorrow I'm doing the bare minimum, and on the weekend I'm going to have a good hard look at my life. It's kind of where I get to. And maybe on the weekend is where I make that plan and go, is there anything that I really don't need to do or that I can push back or delay? Um, what am I kind of missing? What's the zest that I'm missing in life, the enjoyment that I'm missing in life? And for me, often getting outside is that's the replenishment. I think my favorite form of meditation would be sitting at the top of a mountain and just taking that really broad, soft gaze and drinking it
mm.
all in. Total perspective, me being part of something much bigger, a small part of something really big, and looking down at the world from on high kind of resets my perception of how big all my problems are. So I think that's where I would start would be what are the things that really bring me joy and zest in life that I'm missing? And are there any ways I could factor them back in? Even if it's, next Wednesday, I've got the afternoon off and I was going to work on this project, but I'm going to push the project back and get outside for a
Mm,
hike.
exactly. Or read research.
Yeah, well, that would totally be my second
Or
option.
gratitude practices, or like sometimes I really love just stepping on my mat, and not having an agenda, and sometimes
Mm,
just ending up there for an hour or two, or, and just not having any time limits. To me, that can be really, really nourishing to not, like
mm.
so many times when you step on your mat, I'm like, I only have 30 minutes or 60 minutes, or like,
Yes.
it's always very regimented for me. And so it can be really nice just not to have those limitations. But I think what we're kind of leaning toward here is having a sense of control, whether
Yeah.
that means changing your job, whether that means finding resources, whether that means
Mm,
creating a plan, or just simply finding that one thing you can commit to. Because
mm,
again, there is a spectrum here, and if you're totally burnt out and exhausted, you might really need to push away and have a little bit more of a plan and take some time to create that. But
mm.
most of us kind of live in somewhere in between, maybe for a good part of time, a good chunk of time, and just finding that one thing you can do, like the gratitude practices or the
I think a
pranayama
lot of us go to the
practices.
big thing, like I've got to quit my job or I've got to
Yeah.
move cities and start a new life. And often there are things like that that we actually can't really control. You've got kids, you need the money coming in, you've got to keep yada, yada, yada.
Mm,
But to find the things that you can control, to find the little levers that you can pull on, and they can make such a fundamental shift just in your mindset. So I agree. Find the things that you can control. Don't get hung up on the things that you can't.
yes. Totally agree. So lots of valuable resources here.
Mm,
My final takeaways: don't get overwhelmed by all of that, because that was a lot of options. Connect to the, like, try out the thing that felt interesting to you, that sounds enjoyable too, because it being enjoyable
mm,
again is that subjective experience of it being something that's also helpful. So find the thing, test it out, see if it's helpful, if you like it, but then also make a routine of it. 10 minutes a day, maybe. And if you start liking it, maybe that turns into 15 or 20 or 30. But don't let it become another thing you have to
mm.
do. Let it really be this form of nourishment, of taking care of yourself, and in whatever duration that is. Those are kind of my, I think, focal points there.
Yeah, I don't want to add anything to that. I think that's a fantastic place to leave people of step one, admit that you have a problem. Step two, cut yourself some slack. Step three, figure out a plan. See if there are things that you can control. Even tiny little things can have a big compound interest effect if you commit to them every day and see where it takes you.
And remember, we're all in this together. I mean, we all
Hmm.
experience this. It's a human experience that we all go through at some point in our lives in some form. So I think just acknowledging that can be really helpful. Hopefully, we've provided you with some tools that you can plug into. We always love hearing how it goes. So feel free to comment anywhere online or give us your feedback. We love hearing from you. And gosh, I look forward to our next episode.
Ooh, maybe sleep.
It's going on the list for sure. Well, thank you for joining us. We look forward to chatting with you next time, and I hope you enjoy your day. Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you like the show, please be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com, or check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine. You can also email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being a part of our Yoga Medicine community. We look forward to seeing you again. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.